So good morning, and I'm very happy that I can stand here for more reasons, but from the aspect of the topic, I'm happy that I can present you the linguistic rights strategies of the Hungarian National Minority Council, because I was personally involved in the elaboration of the first one and also participated in the public debate on the second linguistic rights strategy. In the very beginning, I would like to clarify what I'm going to talk about. So actually, these strategies deal with one aspect of language rights, and they focus on the official use of minority languages, especially the Hungarian language in Serbia. But of course, I do not want to present them in detail, however, to put the focus on something else, namely whether strategies are important tools in the hands of the minority councils, especially in the hand of the Hungarian National Minority Council. So which were the main issues that governed my research? Primarily, whether national minority councils really need strategies. So as far as you know, minority councils in Serbia are bodies of NTA entrusted by certain public authorizations in field of education, culture, media, and official use of their mother tongue. However, their competencies are of soft character because they do not have consent rights, veto rights. They are part of broader administrative proceedings, so they can participate in decision-making and institution management through proposals, initiatives, and opinions. But they do not have the final word in any of the proceedings. So for me, the question was whether a National Minority Council can fulfill the gaps in the law through their strategies in order to take some further actions in accordance with the law, but beyond the legal duties and legal competencies. So the answer on this first question, yes, of course, national minority councils do need strategies, but for other reasons as well. As Professor Korhec, the first-time president of the democratically elected Hungarian Minority Council, said, the professional strategic planning is one of the fundamentals of effective and successful policy making and good governance generally. It is a tool by and upon which problems might be systematically resolved and public interest protected. So the next question is whether minority councils are ready and enabled to draft and adopt their own strategies. As far as you know, there are altogether 22 national minority councils in Serbia. The law on NTA applies to them equally, so under equal conditions. However, these councils, as national minorities themselves, are different from each other, and these definite differences may justify their different performances as well in the practice. So on these differences, various internal and external factors so this success depends on various internal and external factors. However, one of the main differences among them is the level of their organization, their approach to the future plans, whether they think and act in a coordinated manner instead of ad hoc reactions. And this was summarized nicely in a questionnaire maintained by the National Ombudsman in the period between 2014 and 2018, when the Ombudsman investigated whether minority councils adopted any kind of strategy. And you can see that approximately 10 or half of the minority councils adopted a strategy in field of culture and media. Still, in the case of the education, only the Hungarian Minority Council, and in the field of official use of mother tongue, only the Hungarian Council, and in 2021, the Croatian Minority Council. The Ruthenian and the Bosnian minority councils developed a comprehensive strategy covering the four main areas. So the question arises, why only in field of culture and media we have minority strategies? The answer is simple, because the law requires to adopt such strategies. So the law National Minority Council says that minority councils in Serbia should improve strategies in field of minority culture, and also in order to improve minority information or media in minority language. However, in the second case, they have to follow the principles from the national media strategy. So the answer is quite simple. When the law requires, the minority councils try to adopt such strategies, but only the Hungarian Minority Council adopted 4 separate strategies. And also the Hungarian Minority Council is interesting that it has adopted some other strategies as well on NGO and civic engagement, on adult training and lifelong learning, family support and science. So the goal was to enable more efficient use of resources, to move the Hungarian reality in Serbia closer to the generally accepted values within the community. But as you can see, currently there was only one strategy in the Hungarian Council, and this is the strategy on the official use of the Hungarian language. So this is only one currently valid strategy in the work of the Hungarian Council. After the Constitutional Court's decision on the competencies of NTA in Serbia, the Hungarian Minority Council was required to integrate most of its strategy programs into the 4 remaining areas, because the Constitutional Court said that minority councils cannot deal with such activities that are beyond the 4 main areas, so they cannot take any measures in field of demography, for example, or in field of science, but they have to move within the borders of the law. So it was the reason why, for example, the strategy on Hungarian science was integrated into the strategy on education, or the implementation of the family demography action plan was entrusted to an NGO. But what I'm going to talk about, only the linguistic rights strategy, because it is quite unique. The Croatian example adopted last year is quite good. However, it focuses mostly on the situational analysis. So it devotes only 2 pages to strategic priorities and programs and deals mostly with analysis of the legislation. Still, the Hungarian cases are much more detailed concerning some future plans. Both strategies are similar in their structure. They begin with situation assessment, so with presentation of the legislation, some practical experiences in enforcement of linguistic rights in Serbia. However, the first strategy is better in this aspect because it also supports the findings by some figures. For example, how many court proceedings were conducted in Hungarian, what is the reality on the proportional representation of Hungarians in public services. So it relied on some statistics and official reports as well. And it was my critics and my main comment, negative comment on the second linguistic rights strategy that is currently in force, that unfortunately it lacks such figures. So it doesn't support its findings by certain statistics or reports. So we do not know the starting point from where the strategy would like to move on. The second part of these strategies is about the strategic priorities, and the third one is about the concrete programs. In that respect, the second strategy is better because besides the description of the programs, it also supports the programs with the responsible actors, with some budgetary plans, the time frame in which the programs have to be realized, the indicators, and also the supervision. In the first strategy, that was a midterm strategy between 2012 and 2017, there were 3 main strategic priorities. The first one was to improve the existing legal framework, so primarily to adopt a new law on official use of languages. The currently valid law was adopted in 1991, so it doesn't reflect the new reality in the society. Also, there are no any any innovations of the e-government or e-justice or e-administration. So it was one of the main programs within this strategic priority to change the legislation and also to affect the local municipalities to improve their local regulations. We presented at different roundtables, seminars, and in discussions with the public authorities how to improve the control mechanism of linguistic rights, to clarify the legal text, to avoid some uncertainties, to plan some additional costs that may appear in connection with multilingual administration, and also to use the innovations of e-government. The amendment on the law on official use of languages was adopted in 2018, so after the application period of the first strategy. And what is the reason? The reason is very understandable from one side. In that period, the channels, the political channels between the Minority Council and the politics were underdeveloped. So it was the beginning of improvement of the council itself. So everybody wanted to try its place. There were no certain cooperations, political cooperations, and maybe the emphasis were put on something else. So the legal changes have begun just later. The second strategic priority is about the more effective implementation of linguistic rights by both Serbian and Hungarian public officials. In that sense, the Minority Council provided technical assistance in translation of different forms, bylaws, laws, web pages, the internal documents. We published a legal administrative bilingual dictionary that was free of charge, and it was launched to every lawyer across Vojvodina. There were different informational campaigns on minority language rights, also in Serbia. An informational packet dictionary was published with the most basic terms and expressions, just to have the communication between the clients and the public officials. And of course, there was a set of textbooks in order to make easy learning the Hungarian language for public officials. So there were different seminars, conferences on translation, both for Hungarian and Serbian lawyers. But of course, it doesn't worth anything if the community itself is not aware of its language rights. So the third priority was about the powerful enforcement of minority language rights by the Hungarians themselves. And so a quote that there is no doubt that the approach of a national community to its mother tongue can be improved only by parallel improvement of material, technical conditions of the official use in both quantitative and qualitative terms, but the education of the public cannot be spared. So this third strategic priority focuses on awareness raising, on different informational campaigns. 10,000 households get an informational booklet as part of the Hungarian daily newspaper. There was a TV cartoon series in Hungarian launched several times a day on the regional TV and radio station. And due to these programs, the number of complaints has increased. So this was the reason why the Hungarian Minority Council had to set up a free legal aid program. So the Council represented the clients also before the competent authorities. It has a consultative role, and what is very important, that the relation of trust has emerged between Hungarians and the Council itself. So the National Minority Council of Hungarians get a kind of legitimacy among the members of the community. But it was until 2017, and after that there was a quite long delay of 5 years when the Minority Council of Hungarians adopted a new linguistic rights strategy. And of course it was adopted last year, so I cannot talk about its practical implications. The question is why we need to compare them. But the composition of the council has changed, the drafters, the realizers have changed, and also the political reality has changed in Serbia. So I really think that we need to compare them. You can see that there are much more strategic priorities. So now there are six one. And the approach to linguistic rights is much broader. So this language rights strategy, currently valid one, doesn't focus only on the official use, but on each aspect of public use of Hungarian language in the community. For example, the strategic priority on language and community deals with minority education and sets such programs that have only indirect relationship with language, for example, improving the educational infrastructure or technical material or any other support for Hungarian teachers in Serbia. But on the other side, there are some programs that do not have anything with language, for example, school bus program, summer schools, or for example, improving the urban institution capacities that encourage business and helps the capacity development of Hungarian businesses. So the approach to the language use is much broader. Language and value priority deals with Hungarian culture, Hungarian media in Serbia, so not with official use. I am personally happy because of the language and diaspora strategy priority, because it deals with those Hungarians who live scattered across Vojvodina. However, in their case, the aim is not to improve the official use of their mother tongue, but to help them to live their Hungariousness, so only to preserve the Hungarian language as such in the community. And the drafters of the strategy were aware of this fact, because in this case the responsible actor is the Catholic Church, so not the public officials who will help the Hungarians to use their mother tongue before the public services, but actually to use their mother tongue within their family. But of course I do not want to talk only about the cons of this strategy, but there is also a separate priority about the official use of Hungarian language called State and Citizens. It copies most of the translational and informational programs from the first strategy, but also it relies on the innovations of the e-government. For example, it foresees to publish an online administration guide in Hungarian, which part will be a digitalized legal administrative dictionary. Also, last year a legal scholarship was launched for young Hungarian lawyers in order to increase or ensure the number of lawyers who can speak Hungarian legal terminology. In the plans, there is a mobile application for reporting infringements or to accreditate a training program on minority language rights within the program, the official program of National Administration Academy. So there are very good ideas, and also what is good that besides these classic fields of official use of minority language, the drafters were aware that the public use can take place in many other spaces and contexts. So, for example, there are programs on improving the practical multilingualism in trade or in culture-sensitive marketing, or to use Hungarian in the events of great interest of the community, or, for example, in some texts like school bus tickets or parking stations or restaurant menus. So the approach to the language rights is much broader, and maybe this is the main difference between the two strategies, how the strategies approach to language rights. Of course, in the first case, the programs could be realized by very simple formula. You have these translation informational programs, so the council could rely on its own stuff. The realization was cheaper, and also the control was easier because there were not so many programs. Still, in the second case, because the approach is much broader, and there are in some cases certain structural changes within the society, especially when we are talking about urban capacity buildings. So its realization is much more expensive. And what is important that the first strategy was financed mostly from the Serbian state budget. Still in the second case, the strategy makers rely on donations from the kin state, from Hungary. And also because the approach is much broader in the second case, there is a high need for cooperation. So in the second case, the Hungarian Minority Council will be mostly an umbrella organization that will control the field activities, the institutions, the NGOs. It will divide the fundings and also to take the control in the end. And it needs a very plenty institutional background. And I really think that it is beyond the capacity of other national minorities in Serbia. So the first strategy could be copied, and it was copied in some aspects by other minority councils. However, in the second case, the second language rights strategy of Hungarians is much more developed in that sense that the certain minority groups cannot copy it. And this will be also my conclusion. So which are the conditions of success of strategy making by national minority councils besides these technical things like money or institutional background? So first of all, of course, there should be an appropriate legal framework for enforcement of language rights, but also there should be a clear consensus within the society on the common strategic goals. And in order to reach that consensus, the Minority Council has to have these built-in mechanisms for contact with the community members, and also to have an improved intersectorial cooperation with the state itself, because certain strategic programs can be realized only with help of the state officials. There should be competent persons and responsible persons both in the community and the state itself. And the state, in our case Serbia, should plan the additional costs of the strategy making. So there are minorities who do not have kin states, or whose kin states are not so ready to finance these minority programs abroad. In the case of Hungarians, maybe these plans to ask for external help from Hungary are too high. And in the end, of course, these conditions, even if they are met, do not worth anything if there is no feeling of responsibility within the community itself, because if Hungarians do not greet each other when they enter the office in Hungarian, then actually all these other conditions are not important. So thank you very much for your attention, and I really hope that your councils or our NTAs can copy our strategy.
Thank you very much, Katinka. So please, floor is open now for questions. Okay, then maybe I can start and ask you a question about, do you have any follow-up, or does the National Minority Council of Hungarian make some kind of, not monitoring, my favorite buzzword, about what are the effects of these strategies? Are strategies accompanied also with action plan? I understand you have, so the practical effects.
Yeah. Yeah, in the first case, there was a separate decision how to monitor the implementation. So the problem from my perspective was that the same body was competent to monitor, who was also responsible for the implementation. So I think it doesn't. So my work was actually to implement the programs, and also I was responsible to monitor the results. And I don't think so that it was an effective mechanism. So there was only a formal requirement of monitoring, and I cannot really talk about any quantitative results. So there were no researches on the success of the first language rights strategy. In the case of the second one, because it was adopted last year, we don't know how it will look like. However, what is problem that there is even no any section about the follow-up. We also ask them to put this comment into it because we really need somebody who will monitor. But I think that so this is what shows the low effectiveness or efficiency of these strategies, because they are not binding, they are only policy papers, so they can be used in order to take some small steps, but in the end nobody takes care whether they were realized or not.
Yes, Ivan.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Katinka. Very interesting. It seems from what you presented that the Hungarian community is actually doing rather well, or much better than the other communities. I was just wondering, I know it wasn't the subject of your research, but have you had any clue about how the other minority councils are doing in terms of strategy and implementation? I realized from your table that they were not including all the relevant aspects, but still, is there any, at least informal comparative view, and what is their experience? Would that make a meaningful reference when speaking of the assessment of the effects of such strategies? Thank you.
Thank you. Concerning the cultural and media part, because it was also required from the state, these strategies have their part on situational assessment, so how many cultural institutions they have, whether they have media on their language, if yes, in which programs, and so on. So of course in that aspect there is a certain statistics for these councils. Also, the state, when we have to give our state report on the implementation of the European Charter on regional or minority languages, it also contains certain part on these quantitative parts. When we are talking about those minority councils that have their seat in Vojvodina, for them the provincial secretary on minority issues makes certain statistics and reports how they work, but these statistics are not so detailed, for example, whether or how many proceedings are conducted in minority languages, for example. It was practiced until 2012. However, after that, the Constitutional Court said that the autonomous province of Vojvodina doesn't have any competencies in field of official use of languages. So since 2012, Vojvodina has not maintained such reports, unfortunately, because before that we have a very rich database about any minority languages used officially in Vojvodina, not only about Hungarians, but any, even for example, Macedonian language. So this is what I can say.
Any other question? Ambach, please.
Thank you. Maybe it's just a quick follow-up to Juditha's question. Sorry, it was not entirely clear whether there was a general assessment of the implementation of the strategy once the first strategy ended around 2017, of which experiences could be incorporated or utilized for the second strategy. So whether the process or meetings or any other things to assess.
Yeah, there was no any reports on that, and so it's quite a political and not a legal issue, but for example, only one paragraph is devoted to the first language rights strategy in the second one, so it only mentions that there was a linguistic strategy first time, But as I said, it is more because of political reasons, because the background has changed. The political background has changed, personally only. But I don't think so. So now this is more a historical issue because 2017 was 5 years ago, so whether we have some reports or not is not so relevant today. The more relevant is that unfortunately today in 2022, we do not have any researches made on these issues. So what, as I said, the problem is that you cannot improve strategic programs without a starting point. So it is the biggest task to go into each court to check how many proceedings were, go to each local municipality, check how many, I don't know, Hungarian documents were or forms were filled in. And unfortunately this is lacking. And I really think that they should do this research, but I think that they are afraid of the result of this research.
Just a personal curiosity, but Sherry once comment saying that I learned a lot of interesting positive details. That's compared to what my general impression has been about the National Cultural Council, especially the Hungarian one. So I get interested a little bit about the procedural details, how the strategies are elaborated, who are doing the work, who are doing to identify the appointed. Share us, especially that you participated.
Yeah. Yeah, the procedure, as I said, is an informal, so the Minority Council adopted an internal procedure how to elaborate all these strategies. So there are committees, advisory committees within each council, so not only in the Hungarian but in any other minority councils for the four main areas. In the case of the language rights strategies, there is a committee for the official use of minority language within the Hungarian Council. It is composed of lawyers, translators, linguists, so anybody who can deal with language and language rights. There are the members of the Minority Council and also some external consultants, and they were those who drafted the strategy. After when the strategy was drafted, there was a public debate, a public conference in which everybody could participate and everybody could raise issues, comments, and also we could even send our comments in written form. And what was my experience in both cases, in the first and in the second time as well, that each comments were somehow built in. So the drafters were very open in each cases, and maybe the reason is that, as I said, these are not binding documents but more kind of policy papers. So they try really to reach this condition about this consensus thing within the society. So this is how it looked like.
When you meet everybody, that means the members of the council?
No, everybody even outside, so everybody in the community, because in the regional TV there was news about that, and also in the newspapers we could even download the link of the draft, so in this way we could comment them. So I really can say that it was an open process.
So may I then, I wanted not to ask, but I'm so tempted to ask you a question and use this forum also to address this issue. Every time we discuss the national minority councils in Serbia, we face this reality that there is a discrepancy of capacity of various minority councils to perform their tasks. And there is always a Hungarian, maybe Slovak, maybe Romanian, Bosniak minority councils, and then the rest. Are you familiar whether the state has some measures or policies to somehow make this gap between national minority councils smaller, or whether this coordination of national minority councils also has some impact on really empowering the most actually of minority councils? What is your experience about this really a persisting gap between capacities of different minority councils. And when I say lowering this gap, I don't mean that Hungarian minority council should be stopped down, but
Yeah, of
actually
course.
that the others should be somehow pushed up to meet their tasks. So what is your...
The coordination of minority councils is kind of conference, just to understand, that puts together all the minority councils representatives in Serbia, and as you said, it's more or less coordinate the things between the government and the minority councils themselves. So, so it is not about capacity building. As my experience is today and 10 years ago, that this capacity building is not on the state, but on the community itself. The reason why minority councils do not have their strategy on the official use of language, because their language is not in official use in Serbia. So we have 22 minority councils. Among them there are Russians, there are Ashkali, there are Egyptians even, Greeks. So there are very small communities who can have, for example, their minority culture, but their language is not in official communication, so they cannot use their mother tongue in court proceedings or to communicate with the state officials. From that aspect, the bigger communities or more developed communities were involved, and not by the state, but by some other international NGOs or international forums, to help the smaller communities to build up their capacities in field of official use. But you know, it's very hard to talk about rights in court proceedings, for example, when that community even doesn't have education in its mother tongue. So the discrepancies are so high in some cases that actually I know that the Hungarian Council up today is very seriously involved in these capacity building procedures, but you know the differences are big, so it's very, very hard. And just a short comment, a few years ago the representative of the Egyptian Minority Council said to me that among their plans is to ask for some students from Egypt to come to Serbia to teach people on the Arabic language in order to have their language in use. So not in official, but in public use. So their reality is very far from our reality.
Thank you very much, Katinka.
You're welcome. Thank you.